Based on the book Redemption Through the Eyes of the Gadim, I decided to start a podcast to explain the different ways that we can see the gospel from the perspective of someone who is in chains.
We were blind like Saul, chained like Paul, fell but called. Hear the gospel as we live it in the pen. We the king's men.
No sin became sin.
Like Paul and Silas we prayed, singing praises to the Redeemer for his grace. Redemption through the eyes of the condemned. We going in.
No sin became sin.
We were blind like Saul, chained like Paul, fell but called. Hear the gospel as we live it in the pen. We the king's men.
No sin became sin.
Like Paul and Silas we prayed, singing praises to the Redeemer for his grace. Redemption through the eyes of the condemned. We going in.
Here's an introduction to the podcast that I want to start. And I want to start thinking about the book that I had written, Redemption Through the Eyes of the Condemned. And really what I wanted to do there in that book is show how prison or justice system in general can relate to and help us understand a new perspective of the scriptures. If you've ever wondered how justice, redemption, condemnation, the law, patience, and even hope are concepts and ideas that prisoners deal with, and how those words are very similar to the New Testament, as well as already not yet tension concepts such as corporate identity that dominate the prison experience is such a heavy influence inside the New Testament. I want to dive into the ways that we can think more about how prison related scenarios and situations and even circumstances can help us see a new perspective into the ancient letter of the New Testament. So we have started a series on the New Testament. Guys have gotten a bachelor's degree in biblical studies, and they are incarcerated in the moment, and right now they're writing commentaries from their prison experience to relate to the New Testament to help them understand it. So they have a good education behind them to think about the scriptures, to do correct exegesis on the text, and then they can do their experience and show and shed light technically on the New Testament. And maybe we can get a better glimpse of what life was like. For instance, I have done the book of Romans, the perspective that Paul had in the first century, a little bit clearer than we would have from the 21st century secular postmodern world, a world dominated by social media, quickness, fastness, everything's now delivered to you, very, very far from the idea of the first century. However, prison still handwrites letters, as Paul wrote letters. They talked about words like justification, like we all in prison want to be justified of our crime, or we're done injustice to, or we're under the condemnation of the state, or we're hopeful that we'll get out, just like a Christian is hopeful of the kingdom of glory to come in the midst of tribulation and trials and patience. So I want to be able to dive into it, but I wrote the book, but I wanted to be able to talk about it, and I'm going to do a series of interviews as well. Dr. Douglas Moo, who's a real famous guy on the book of Romans, he's the chair of the translation committee for the NIV Bible. He's going to be with us and do an interview, and I'll also get some interviews from people who have gone back into the prisons and help us understand just what their experience has been to go into the prison and talk to the guys and the men and women, and how that has shaped their understanding of the gospel in a better way. In a nutshell, my book's thesis ultimately rides on this idea that in Adam, we were all in prison, and we're born in Adam's prison. And the only way out of Adam's prison is for Christ to come down and unlock the door that delivers us from the condemnation that Adam and Eve presented to the world in the garden, and walk through the door, which the Apostle Paul calls baptism, the door that transfers us from Adam's prison to Christ's kingdom. If you look in Colossians 1:13, he says that we've been delivered from the dominion of darkness, Adam's prison, and transferred into the kingdom of his beloved Son. It's prison's very similar to that, because you're in prison, you're under an old law, a specific regimen there, and then you're transferred when you've been delivered from that condemnation to another state in which we call the free world. And so I relate the prison condemnation and injustified or justified or in the law and things like that. I relate those experiences to how we understand this great transfer of realms in the New Testament. Granted, Dr. Moo wrote his recent work on Pauline theology, and his biggest portion of that connected the entire writings of Paul was this idea of realm transfer, the Adam to Christ, the old man, the new man, all of its connection to this imprisonment and deliverance. And so I want to talk more about that, and we'll get into the different and many ways that we can think about this one letter, the book of Romans, 7,117 words, a very long letter, and I want to be able to summarize most of these parts, and we'll dive into them and have discussions and look at ways that we can help maybe give you a fresh perspective of what the gospel is saying. All right, well, join us in our next episode and chat and the introduction to Paul's letter to the Romans, and then we'll go into chapter 1, verses 1 through 7.